The sun was setting behind the red cliffs of southern New Mexico, and the desert wind carried the kind of silence that feels older than memory. Dust swirled around my Jeep as I drove down a cracked dirt road leading toward a place my family once called Cruz's Curse. That's what they named my inheritance, 1,000,000 acres of scorched land and broken fences that nobody wanted. I was 38, divorced, and apparently foolish enough to believe that what everyone else dismissed might still mean something. A ranch of rocks and rattlesnakes, my brother Marcus had said with a smirk when the will was read. Perfect for someone who ruins everything she touches. My mother laughed elegant as ever in her pearl necklace and added, "Your grandmother always did have a flair for tragic gifts." Their laughter echoed inside me long after the lawyer's office went quiet. The will had been simple. To my granddaughter, Natalie Cruz, I leave the Cruz Ranch and all its rights for reasons she will understand in time. My mother and brother were furious. They'd expected control, not sentiment. They whispered that Grandma Dolores was losing her mind near the end, that I was manipulating her. But I wasn't there for money. I was there when she took her last breath, frail but sharp-eyed, her hand trembling as she whispered, "Promise me, Nat. Promise you'll keep the land safe until the sun tells you its secret." I promised, though I had no idea what that meant. That night, while the others argued over what was left of her jewelry, I stood outside beneath the stars and looked at the horizon glowing faintly red. I remember thinking how even the barren can look holy under the right light. 6 months later, I was back here alone, driving into the wind with her old map folded on the seat beside me. Every mile seemed to peel away a layer of my past, the noise, the expectations, the shame of being the Cruz who never fit in. My mother, Victoria, built her life on power and appearances. She loved me the way she loved expensive furniture only when it shined. When I married a mechanic instead of a lawyer, she called it a phase. When I divorced him after years of silence and infidelity, she called me a disappointment. The land was supposed to humiliate me, a physical symbol of my failure. But as the Jeep crawled up the last ridge and the full expanse of the ranch opened before me, something inside me stirred a stubborn, almost defiant calm. Maybe I was tired of being their punchline. Maybe I was ready to find out why my grandmother had spent 40 years paying taxes on land everyone swore was worthless. The old ranch house came into view, weather-beaten but still standing, its roof sagging like tired shoulders. I parked, stepped out, and let the dry heat press against my skin. The air smelled of sunburned sage and rust. On the porch, a single horseshoe hung crooked on a nail. My grandmother had nailed it upside down. "Luck spilling out," she used to joke. I touched it gently and whispered, "I'm here, Grandma." The silence answered like an echo from the bones of the earth. For a moment, I almost turned back. The isolation was crushing, the kind that makes you question your sanity. But then I remembered their faces. Marcus's smug grin, my mother's condescending sigh. They thought I'd sell this land, pocket the change, and disappear. They didn't know me at all. I walked toward the horizon until the sun touched the edge of the desert. Its last light turned the sand gold, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt like I was standing on something sacred, something everyone else had been too blind to see. And in that moment, beneath the burning sky, I realized something simple yet electrifying. They might have mocked the land, but this land was about to reveal who truly owned the truth. The following week, I drove back to Houston, dust still clinging to my boots, only to walk into a dinner that felt more like an ambush than a family gathering. My mother's mansion shimmered under white marble and glass, everything smelling faintly of citrus polish and control. At the head of the table sat Victoria Cruz, 63, graceful as a queen and twice as cold. My brother Marcus was already there, designer suit, expensive watch, fake smile. He poured himself whiskey before even greeting me. "Well," he said, eyes glinting. "How's life on the moon?" I forced a tight smile. "You mean the ranch? I mean that wasteland," my mother cut in, voice calm but edged. "Natalie, do you realize how ridiculous this looks? You living alone on 1,000,000 acres of dry dirt while we handle real investments." Her tone dripped with the same superiority she'd used since I was a child. I took a slow sip of water, steadying my voice. "I'm not asking for your approval." "You never do," Marcus said, smirking. "That's the problem." He leaned forward. "You know the property's a liability, right? Taxes, upkeep. I can help you sell it before it eats you alive. Sell it, I repeated quietly. Grandma didn't leave it for you to sell, my mother said, swirling her wine. She left it because she pitied you. You were her charity case. The words landed like a slap, but I'd learned not to flinch. You think she was crazy? I asked. I think she was desperate to feel relevant. My mother replied, her expression flawless, practiced. That land is a financial corpse, and you're clinging to it like it means something. Marcus laughed loud and sharp. Come on, Mom, let her play cowgirl. Everyone needs a hobby after a failed marriage. I felt the old burn of humiliation, the same heat I used to feel as a child when they'd corner me with their perfection. Back then, I'd run to Grandma Dolores and she'd whisper, "They only mock what they fear." I never understood it until now. You're wrong, I said quietly. That land means everything. The table went silent. My mother's gaze sharpened. You always did enjoy martyrdom, and you always did enjoy control. Her hand froze mid-air wineglass, trembling slightly before she set it down. The air tightened. Marcus chuckled nervously, trying to diffuse it. Okay, time out. Let's be rational. We can make you a generous offer. I've got a buyer already lined up, a renewable energy company. We'd handle all the paperwork. I looked at him. Why are you so interested in land you called worthless 6 months ago? His eyes flickered just enough to confirm what I suspected: he wasn't there to help. Because I'm your brother, he said too quickly. And because I know you. You'll drown in the first tax cycle. I stood up. Thanks for your concern, but I'm keeping it. My mother's lips curved in that cruel half-smile I'd known my whole life. You're making a mistake. You can't afford Natalie. Remember that when it is too late. I turned toward the door, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. You always warned me about mistakes, Mother, but you never realized your warnings were the reason I learned to survive them. As I left, I caught my reflection in the glass doorway. Older, steadier, still bruised, but not broken. Behind me, I heard Marcus mutter, "She'll come crawling back." My mother replied, "Let her. Pride is expensive." They laughed again, the same laughter that had followed me for years. Only this time, it didn't sting. It sounded like a ticking clock. Because for the first time, I could sense something beneath their arrogance: fear, and they had every reason to be afraid. The first rain of summer came 3 nights later, soft at first, then fierce enough to rattle the tin roof of the old ranch house. I couldn't sleep. The storm felt alive, like it was trying to wake something buried deep beneath the desert. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wooden box my grandmother had left me, carved with small suns and worn smooth from her hands. I hadn't opened it since the funeral. When I lifted the lid, the smell of cedar and dust filled the air, bringing her voice back as clear as memory. Inside lay a folded map, a faded photograph, and a letter tied with a thin red ribbon. The photo was black and white, taken decades ago. My grandmother stood beside 2 men in hard hats, the kind used in mining. Behind them was a ridge of jagged stone I didn't recognize. On the back, in her looping handwriting, were 3 words: "The sun knows." The letter was brief. "Natalie, this land will test you. Keep your promise. What I found beneath it can heal or destroy depending on who holds it. Wait for the summer solstice, noon. The sun will show you the truth." I read the lines over and over until the ink blurred with tears. I didn't cry for sentiment. I cried because I suddenly understood that she'd known her family. She'd known what my mother and Marcus were capable of, their hunger dressed as ambition. And she'd trusted me instead. At dawn, when the storm finally passed, I laid the map flat on the table. It was hand-drawn, almost childlike, but precise. Faint pencil marks traced ridges and dry riverbeds, with one spot circled and labeled only with an X. Underneath, she'd written Project Selenium 1981. I had no idea what that meant, but something about the name made the air feel heavier. The next morning, I drove into the nearest town, a sun-faded place called Arroyo Vista. I spent hours in the county records office flipping through brittle documents until I found a single file on the Cruz Ranch. There, among dusty deeds and tax receipts, was a note from the early 80s Department of Energy site review: denied insufficient water table data. It made no sense. Why would the DOE care about a dry ranch? I copied the file and drove back the wheels, throwing gravel like sparks. That night, I dreamed of my grandmother's hands, strong-veined, holding sunlight between her fingers. I woke up to headlights sweeping across my window. Someone was outside. I grabbed my flashlight and looked through the blinds. A black SUV idled near the fence. When I stepped onto the porch, the vehicle reversed slowly. No license plate visible. My pulse thundered. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe my family's sudden interest wasn't just about pride anymore. The next morning, I called the local sheriff's office. The deputy who answered sounded polite, but disinterested. Could be ranch hands, could be surveyors, he said. That area attracts folks looking for oil rights. I hung up unsatisfied. The map sat on the table beside me, taunting in its simplicity. Noon. Solstice. That was only a week away. For the next few days, I scoured my grandmother's journals, trying to find any mention of selenium. I found entries about soil tests, water rights, even meteor samples, but one passage stopped me cold. They came again asking for access, said it was harmless research, but I've seen men with that kind of urgency before. It's never harmless. I'll seal it myself if I have to. My hands trembled as I read the date, July 17, 1981. The same month, my grandmother had mysteriously quit her government contract job and moved back to the ranch. That night, lightning flashed again in the distance, and I made a choice. I would go to the spot marked on the map, no matter what waited there. Before going to bed, I whispered into the empty house. You were right, Grandma. The land does matter. Outside, the desert wind rose again, carrying with it the sound of something shifting underground like the earth itself was breathing. 3 days later, the first letter arrived. White envelope, no return address, printed in perfect block letters. We represent Horizon Renewables. It began offering to purchase the Cruz Ranch for $25 million payable immediately. I read the number twice, certain I'd misread. $25 million for sand snakes and a collapsing house. The signature at the bottom was only initials ML. I folded it carefully, placed it beside the map, and stared at both for a long time. Then came the calls. First, a polite woman claiming to be from the Department of Environmental Affairs. She spoke with bureaucratic precision, asking about hazardous waste storage compliance codes, groundwater contamination. When I pressed for details, she hung up. That same afternoon, Marcus called. I told you it was a liability, he said, his tone oily with satisfaction. Now the feds are circling. You're not equipped to handle this, Nat. Let me manage it quietly. I'll find you a buyer before it turns into a lawsuit. Funny, I said, because one already found me. The silence on the line told me what I needed to know. Who are you talking to? Marcus. He laughed softly. You don't want to know. Just take the deal before it's too late. Then he hung up. That night, I sat on the porch, the desert stretching endlessly before me, thinking of my grandmother's warning. Some treasures destroy the ones who rush them. Maybe that was what she meant. The next morning, a black SUV, the same one from before, was parked half a mile down the road. 2 men stood beside it, pretending to check a map. I drove closer, and they immediately turned away, climbing back into the vehicle and speeding off. Their tires kicked up a wall of dust that lingered long after they vanished. I took photos of the license plate blank again. By noon, another offer arrived. This one was from a nonprofit conservation group proposing to purchase the land for ecological restoration. The price, $10 million cash to be completed in 48 hours. The letter included legal drafts so thorough they could only have come from someone with inside knowledge of the property. Each clause referenced environmental protections under obscure DOE guidelines. Whoever was behind this, they weren't random investors. They knew exactly what they wanted and where it was buried. That evening, as I was locking up the house, a delivery truck pulled into the driveway. The driver, a thin man with sunburned skin, handed me a brown package. Sign here, he said without looking up. No sender, just my name typed in bold letters. Inside was an old tape recorder and a single cassette labeled 1981, Site 7. My pulse quickened. I dug out an old player from the attic and pressed play. A man's voice filled the room, crackling with static. This is Supervisor Green logging sample removal from Selenium Site 7. Unauthorized personnel attempted access project halted per directive from D. Cruz. The recording ended abruptly. My heart hammered. D. Cruz. Dolores. My grandmother had shut them down. That was why they wanted it back. I stepped outside the wind, picking up again, carrying a low metallic hum. It wasn't from any machine I could see, it came from the ground. For a moment, I thought I could feel it vibrating beneath my boots, faint but steady, like the pulse of something buried alive. I spent the night reading through every document I'd collected, drawing connections. Horizon Renewables nonprofit restoration, even Marcus all roads led to the same trail of shell companies. Every one of them traced back to a single source, Helios Development Group, headquartered in Houston, where my mother held a major stake. My chest tightened. So that was it. The family plan all along: pressure me, buy me out, reclaim the land before I learned what was hidden underneath. But they'd made one mistake. They assumed I was still the daughter who folded under their approval. They didn't know what solitude and silence had turned me into. They didn't know that I wasn't protecting the land for them anymore. I was protecting it from them. I woke before dawn to the faint crackle of static. For a second, I thought the tape recorder had somehow started again. Then I smelled its smoke. Thick, acrid, sharp enough to claw the back of my throat. I ran outside barefoot. The east side of the ranch house glowed orange fire, eating through the warped wooden siding like it had been waiting for permission. I grabbed the old hose near the porch, but the pressure was pitiful, a weak dribble that hissed uselessly against the flames. I called 911, voice shaking but steady. It took the volunteer fire crew 40 minutes to reach me. By then, the damage was done, the study and half the kitchen gone, smoke still curling from blackened beams. One of the firefighters, an older man with weathered skin and kind eyes, handed me a bottle of water. "Lucky it didn't spread," he said. Wind shifted west just in time. Lucky. That word sat heavy in my chest. As they packed up, I noticed something odd near the fence line, clean boot prints leading away from the property, 2 sets sharp and recent. They didn't belong to me or the firefighters. After they left, I called the sheriff's office again. Deputy Harris, the same voice from before, drove out later that morning. He squinted at the ashes, chewing on a toothpick. "Could have been an accident," he said. "Old wiring, maybe a spark from that generator." I pointed to the footprints. "Old wiring doesn't walk away." He hesitated, then sighed. "Miss Cruz, I know your family's name carries weight. Sometimes weight attracts trouble. You might want to lay low for a bit. You think this is about the land. I think it's about power," he said simply. "Out here, that's usually the same thing." He left me with a look that said more than his words ever could. That night, I sat by the burned remains of the study, the smell of char still clinging to everything I owned. Inside one of the scorched drawers, I found something the fire hadn't touched: my grandmother's ledger. The cover was blackened, but the pages inside were intact. Near the back, I found a series of strange entries, coordinate states, and single-word notes. Survey, containment, refused. The last entry was dated a week before she died. It read only, "They'll come through blood next." My stomach knotted. I stared out at the dark horizon, the fence barely visible in the moonlight. That was when I saw it, a fresh cut along the western perimeter, the wire still dangling loose, as if someone had slipped through recently. My flashlight caught a shimmer of something metal embedded in the sand. I knelt and brushed away the dirt. It was a bullet casing, small caliber, fired recently. I didn't sleep. I sat up with my grandmother's map spread across the table, tracing every ridge, every dry riverbed. I marked the direction of the footprints, the location of the cut fence, the burned room. Everything pointed toward the southern ridge, the same spot circled on her map, the same X marked with her careful hand. I whispered her name into the dark, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was asking for guidance or forgiveness. When morning came, the world looked deceptively calm. The sky was bright, the air thin and dry, the desert silent except for the buzz of cicadas. But something inside me had shifted. The fire had taken the last piece of comfort this land offered. Whatever they wanted, they were getting desperate. I packed my bag, loaded extra fuel water and the ledger, and before leaving the porch, I looked back at the blackened doorway. "You were right, Grandma," I said softly. "They came through blood." Then I drove toward the southern ridge where the truth waited under a sun too bright to lie. The southern ridge looked harmless enough in the morning light, just a long stretch of ochre hills where the desert met the sky. But the map said otherwise. I stopped the Jeep near a half-collapsed windmill and waited. At 9 sharp, a dust-covered pickup rolled up behind me. Dr. Lionel Grayson stepped out lean and gray-bearded, sunburned in the way only geologists and ghosts get. He was ex-NASA retired after disagreements with his department. I'd found him through a university contact who said he still chased strange readings. He shook my hand firmly. "You said you've got anomalies. Let's see them." We spent the next 2 hours hiking across rock that crunched like bone underfoot. The heat shimmered, making the ground seem alive. Grayson used a handheld magnetometer scanning the soil while mumbling numbers. Around noon, the device beeped a sharp metallic tone that cut through the wind. "There," he said, kneeling. "Magnetic fields 50 times baseline. There's something metallic under here, big and sealed. Not natural." He marked coordinates, comparing them to my grandmother's map. The X matched exactly. I felt the back of my neck prickle. How deep, I asked. Hard to tell without a core drill. But whatever it is, it's dense. Could be military-grade containment. The phrase made my stomach twist. Containment of what? He gave me a look that didn't comfort me. In the 80s, the DOE tested all kinds of storage methods. Energy materials, fusion prototypes, even biocontainment. If they buried something here, it wasn't by accident. When we packed up, I noticed new tire tracks beside the ridge, fresh and wide, not from either of our vehicles. I pointed them out. He frowned. "Those are government-issue treads. GSA models." By the time I dropped him back in town, he looked uneasy. "Whatever's down there," he said, "you might not want to dig alone." That night, as I drove back to the ranch, I kept glancing at my rearview mirror. At first, it was nothing, just the long, empty road slicing through the desert. Then headlights appeared far behind me, distant but steady. They followed for 20 miles, never gaining, never falling back. When I finally turned onto the private road leading home, they slowed, paused at the turn, then disappeared. I parked the Jeep in silence, heart hammering. Inside the house, I called Marcus, testing a theory. "Were you planning to visit?" I asked. He laughed like it was a joke. Why would I visit a graveyard I hung up before he could finish? Sleep was impossible. I sat by the window, the desert outside, glowing faintly under the moon. Around midnight, a low hum filled the air again, the same pulse I'd felt beneath my boots days earlier. It vibrated through the floorboards, steady and unnatural. I stepped outside. The windmill creaked the sand, shifting underfoot. The sound seemed to come from the ridge itself, deep underground. The next morning, Grayson called. His voice was low, urgent. "I did some digging," he said. "Those DOE coordinates. They're part of a restricted file labeled Selenium Project last accessed 1987. The records vanish after that. Someone scrubbed them. Can you trace who? No. But I found one more thing, a classified environmental report listing contamination risk within the Cruz property boundaries, signed by someone named D. Cruz." I froze. Dolores. She was the one who filed the warning, he continued. "And guess who countersigned it? Victoria Cruz. Your mother." For a second, all the air left my lungs. My mother had been involved. That explained her hostility, her obsession with control, her push to sell the land fast. Maybe she wasn't just greedy. Maybe she was hiding something she helped create. Grayson's tone softened. "Natalie, if this connects to what I think it does, it's dangerous. You need to be careful who you talk to." I thanked him, then stared out across the sand where the ridge shimmered in the heat. The land was no longer silent. It was whispering in a voice I was finally starting to understand. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about legacy and the kind that burns. The next morning, a man showed up at the diner in Arroyo Vista. I'd seen him before, the polished kind of stranger who didn't belong anywhere near ranch dust and truck stop coffee. He wore a gray suit that looked wrong against the sunburned crowd and introduced himself simply as Mr. Parker. He slid into the booth across from me without asking. "Miss Cruz," he said, smiling like we already knew each other. "You've been busy. I admire initiative." I stared at him. "You admire or monitor it." He chuckled. "Both depending on the day." He leaned in slightly. You've come across things that don't concern you. I'm here to save you trouble. Which department? I asked. The one that cleans up messes before they make headlines. He pulled out a crisp folder and placed it on the table. Inside was a purchase agreement, Helios Development Group at the Top Horizon Renewables listed as a subsidiary. You sign this, you walk away with $50 million. No taxes, no questions. 50, I repeated. Last week it was 25. He shrugged. Consider it hazard pay. You'll want to take it before someone else takes the choice away. Something cold tightened in my stomach. You're not from Helios, I said. You're from them, the ones who built what's under that ridge. He smiled without denying it. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. Shame she didn't understand the importance of cooperation. I stared straight into his eyes. She understood too well. That's why she stopped you. For the first time, his smile faltered. He stood, smoothed his jacket, and slid a card across the table. Walk away, Miss Cruz. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Then he left. I waited 5 minutes before touching the card. It was blank, except for an embossed insignia, a sun split in half by a lightning bolt. I turned it over. The back read only Project Selenium, Site 7. That night I called Grace and told him everything. He went silent for a long moment, then said Natalie Site 7 was decommissioned in '87 after a containment failure. Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, it was supposed to house helium-3 fusion prototypes. That's the kind of tech the government buries under decades of red tape because it's worth more than gold and more dangerous than plutonium if handled wrong. My hand tightened around the phone. Then my grandmother wasn't protecting land. She was protecting a fuse. Exactly. When I hung up, I noticed headlights again outside my window. Same black SUV engine idling. I walked out onto the porch, flashlight in hand, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. You're trespassing, I shouted. The lights blinked twice, then went dark. A moment later, the vehicle reversed slowly and vanished into the night. By morning, I'd made up my mind. If they wanted the land, they'd have to take it from me face to face. I drove into Houston to Helios's glass tower headquarters, a monument of mirrored arrogance. In the lobby, I asked for Marcus Cruz, listed publicly as one of their strategic consultants. The receptionist's polite smile cracked when she heard the name. He's not available. Tell him his little sister is, I said. 10 minutes later, he appeared flustered, handsome in that hollow way he'd perfected. What the hell are you doing here? You work for them. It's just consulting. Selling me out isn't consulting. He sighed, looking suddenly tired. You don't understand how big this is. It's not just about money. It's about control. Mom started it decades ago. You can't fight what she built. I stared at him, seeing not my brother, but a stranger who'd already chosen his side. Maybe not, I said quietly, but I can finish what she started the right way. He grabbed my wrist, voice sharp. Nat, if you keep digging, you'll end up like Grandma. I pulled free. Then maybe that's exactly where I belong. Back in my car, I opened my grandmother's ledger again. Between 2 pages I hadn't noticed before, a folded note slipped out. Her handwriting was faint but clear. If they come again, tell the truth in daylight. Secrets only protect the guilty. The sun was rising over Houston's skyline when I whispered, Daylight, it is Grandma. 2 days later, I drove back to the ranch and found 3 cars already parked in the dirt driveway, 1 black sedan, 1 silver SUV, and Marcus's red sports car that looked ridiculous against the sun-baked clay. My pulse quickened. They were waiting. I cut the engine and stepped out the heat wrapping around me like a dare. My mother stood near the porch, immaculate as always, in a cream blazer and dark sunglasses. Marcus leaned against his car, pretending this was casual. Beside them stood my Aunt Eleanor, their lawyer and silent executioner in heels. I'd seen her in court once, turning men twice her size into ghosts. Nice of you to show up, my mother said smoothly. We were beginning to think you'd gone native. Breaking and entering would have been faster, I replied. Eleanor lifted a folder. We're here to make things easier for you, Natalie. There are legal complications you clearly don't understand. Marcus smirked. She never does. I walked up the porch steps until I stood level with my mother. If this is about Helios, I already know. For the first time, I saw the faintest crack in her posture. You don't know what you're talking about. Project Selenium, Site 7. Grandma shut it down and you've been trying to reopen it ever since. Her lips thinned. Dolores was a sentimental fool. She thought integrity could stop progress. She thought ethics mattered more than greed. Marcus pushed off his car, voice rising. You think this is about greed? That thing under the ridge could power half the country. You want to sit on it out of pride. I want to keep it from people like you. He stepped closer, the desert sun catching the anger in his eyes. You're going to regret that. Eleanor intervened, voice cool and professional. Let's remain civil. Natalie signed the transfer papers. You'll receive compensation beyond market value and the matter will be closed. What happens if I don't? Marcus smiled too calmly. Then Mom files an injunction for incompetence. Claims you're emotionally unfit. The court freezes your assets and Helios gets the land anyway. Your choice. The paper fluttered slightly in the dry wind as Eleanor held it out. I looked at it, then at my mother. You really would drag me through court to hide what you did. Victoria removed her sunglasses, and for the first time I saw age behind the perfection lines etched by decades of manipulation. You're my daughter, she said softly, and that's why I'm offering you mercy. Don't confuse righteousness with survival. Something inside me went cold and clear. Mercy from you is just control with perfume. I pulled my phone from my pocket and pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the air, recorded from our last call. You don't want to know. Just take the deal before it's too late. Eleanor's face blanched. You recorded everything I said. And copies are already with my attorney and the Department of Energy's Ethics Division. Marcus swore under his breath, stepping forward, but my mother raised a hand to stop him. She stared at me for a long time, something unreadable passing through her eyes. Anger, maybe fear, maybe the first shadow of consequence. You think you've won, she said. No, I replied quietly. I think the truth finally has a voice. For a moment, none of us moved. The only sound was the wind scraping across the sand. Then she turned sharply toward her car. We're done here. They drove off in a flurry of dust, leaving the papers fluttering on the porch steps like dead leaves. When the silence settled, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands trembled, but not from fear. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted, and they knew it. The land stretched before me, vast, defiant, still humming faintly beneath the heat. I looked toward the southern ridge where the sun burned white against the sky. Whatever waited under there, it was bigger than any of us, and now I was the only one left standing between it and them. The morning of the summer solstice arrived hard and bright, the kind of light that burns through doubt. I drove toward the southern ridge with the map beside me and my grandmother's ledger on the seat, her words echoing in my mind. Tell the truth in daylight. The road ended at a jagged formation of sandstone spires. The air shimmered with heat, and the only sound was the buzz of cicadas. I checked my watch, 11:56 a.m., 4 minutes to noon. At exactly noon, the sun blazed straight above, and the shadows of the spires stretched across the ground like black veins. Slowly, the longest one pointed directly toward a narrow crevice in the rock face, the same shape drawn on the old map. I climbed down, hands raw against the stone, until I saw it a sheet of metal half buried under dirt and roots. I cleared it with my boots. A rusted seal marked with that same insignia, half sun, half lightning bolt, glimmered faintly in the heat. I knelt, heart pounding, and brushed away more sand until a steel hatch appeared reinforced with bolts older than I was. A small panel jutted out its edges lined with corrosion. In the ledger between 2 pages, I found a key taped to a note. The sun opens what shadow hides. I turned the key, and with a grinding hiss, the hatch released. The scent of iron and earth rose up, and a gust of cool air swept my face like a breath from the past. I flicked on my flashlight and descended the narrow staircase spiraling downward. Each step groaned beneath me. The walls were smooth steel, lined with conduit and faded warnings. DOE property, hazardous materials, authorized personnel only. My pulse was loud in my ears. When I reached the bottom, the tunnel widened into a chamber lit by emergency lights that somehow still flickered after decades. At its center stood a sealed cylinder the size of a truck, humming faintly, frost clinging to its surface despite the desert heat above. A soft click echoed behind me. I spun around, blinding beam cutting through the dark. Two men stood at the doorway, dark suits, unreadable faces, badges glinting. One stepped forward, voice calm. "Miss Cruz, step away from the containment unit." I recognized the taller one immediately. "Agent Parker," I said, "lost your sales pitch." He didn't flinch. "This site is classified under federal law. You've violated multiple security statutes, but I'm willing to resolve this quietly." The second man, older and steadier, spoke. "Your grandmother worked with us, Miss Cruz. She understood the importance of keeping this sealed." I held up the ledger. "No. She understood the importance of keeping you honest. This record proves you breached your own containment laws." Parker's jaw tightened. "You think the world's ready to handle what's down here? Helium-3 fusion could change civilization, but if it leaks, it could also poison everything within 50 miles. So you hide it." "We protect it," he said sharply. "You think your grandmother didn't agree? She signed the pact that let this stay buried. Then why were you paying my mother's company through Helios to reopen the project?" The silence that followed was its own confession. The older Agent Collins, his badge red, finally said, "We offered your mother a partnership years ago. She wanted control instead. She kept trying to reclaim the land through intermediaries. Dolores refused." I felt the world tilt. My grandmother died protecting this from her own daughter. Collins nodded once, and from the corporations that would sell it to the highest bidder. Parker stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You can walk away, Natalie. We'll compensate you fairly and no one will ever know this existed." I looked at the glowing cylinder, the frost catching the flashlight beam like trapped lightning. "And if I don't," he exhaled through his nose, "then you'll make enemies you can't see coming." I thought of Grandma's note of the ledger entries marked, "Refused" of the night they'd burned my house to the ground. My fear turned to something harder resolve. "You already did," I said. Before either could move, I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the chamber, the containment unit, and their faces. "That's already backed up to a cloud server. If anything happens to me, this goes public." Parker's expression hardened. Collins raised a hand, signaling him to stop. "She's not bluffing," he said quietly. "Then to me, if you expose this recklessly, people will die." "Then help me make sure the right people don't?" We stared at each other across the dim light, 3 generations of choices condensed into one impossible moment. Collins nodded slowly. "Give us 72 hours. I'll arrange a meeting with the Department of Energy. You'll have your chance to tell the truth legally." I didn't trust him, but I trusted my grandmother's faith and decency more than my family's greed. 72 hours, I said. As I climbed back into the sunlight, the desert seemed different, less barren, more alive, as if it too had been holding its breath for 40 years. Behind me, the hatch sealed shut again, locking in the hum of the future and the ghosts of the past. I looked at the horizon where heat shimmered like flame and whispered, "You were right, Grandma." The sun did tell me the truth. 2 days later, I was in Santa Fe, sitting in a government conference room that smelled like metal and paper, a place where truth was treated like a classified document. Across from me sat Agent Collins, 3 Department of Energy officials, and a woman who introduced herself as Special Counsel Rivera. Parker wasn't there. I wasn't sure if that was good or bad. They slid a thick folder across the table. Inside were copies of old contracts, declassified in name, only black bars covering entire paragraphs. Rivera spoke first, voice calm clipped. "Miss Cruz, your grandmother, Dolores Cruz, entered a confidentiality agreement with the DOE in 1981 concerning Project Selenium. She was the on-site compliance officer." I nodded. "And my mother, Victoria Cruz." Collins looked uncomfortable. Rivera continued. "Your mother was a private contractor who helped coordinate the Civilian Oversight Committee. But after the project's suspension, she attempted to claim intellectual property rights to selenium data. Those claims were denied." Denied, I repeated. Yet her company Helios kept receiving payments through proxy subsidiaries. Rivera hesitated, then said, "That's part of what we're investigating." I leaned forward. "She's been using Helios to launder money from this program for decades. I have proof letters, bank transfers, and a recording where her legal counsel threatens me to sell the land. I want to make this public." Collins shook his head. "Natalie, listen to me. If you go public, this doesn't just ruin a few reputations. It destabilizes ongoing research in quantum energy. There are international eyes on helium-3. It's worth trillions. Wars start over less." I met his gaze. So your solution is to keep it buried. Keep my grandmother's name tangled in the lies my mother built. Rivera interjected gently. There is another way. We're prepared to make you a formal offer. She slid a second folder forward. $50 million. Immediate confidentiality. We take the property, decommission the site, and your family's involvement disappears from record. My fingers hovered over the folder but didn't touch it. 50 million. The same number Parker had thrown at me in the diner. The same number my grandmother had paid in taxes spread across decades of defiance. You think money erases what she did? I asked. Rivera's voice softened. It's not about erasure. It's about containment. The alternative is exposure lawsuits and possible prosecution for your mother, your brother, and potentially you. Prosecution for what? For breaching federal security protocols, Collins said quietly. You broke into a restricted site, recorded federal agents, and leaked classified coordinates. I stared at him. You think you can scare me with laws my family already broke? He didn't answer. Rivera's tone hardened. You have 24 hours to decide. When they left me alone, I stared at the mirrored wall opposite my chair. Somewhere behind it, someone was watching, waiting for me to fold. I didn't. I thought of Grandma Dolores sitting at some similar table 40 years earlier, refusing a pen. That night, back at the hotel, I spread out all the evidence I had, the ledger, the recordings, the letters from Helios. I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. My grandmother hadn't just kept a secret. She'd built a trap. Every payment Helios made, every contract they forged, every shell company they created, all traced back to the Cruz Ranch. The land wasn't just a vault for Helium-3. It was the proof of their crimes. At sunrise, I called Agent Collins. Tell Rivera I have my answer, I said. When I arrived back at the DOE office, she was waiting, papers ready, pen uncapped. I sat down slowly. I'll cooperate, I said, but not quietly. We'll make this public through a joint statement, federal oversight, full transparency. You can have access, but the truth comes first. Rivera frowned. That's not how this works. It is now, I said, or I go straight to the press. Collins looked between us, then gave a small nod. Let her speak. It's her land. For a long moment, Rivera said nothing. Then she exhaled, slid the folder aside, and reached for a new document. Then you'll need to sign as co-chair of the Oversight Committee. It took me a second to process what she'd said. Co-chair. Collins smiled faintly. Your grandmother's role revived. History repeats itself, only this time on your terms. I took the pen. Then let's begin. By the end of that week, everything moved like a storm, fast, loud, unstoppable. The Department of Energy had opened a formal investigation into Helios Development Group. The press didn't know the details, but whispers spread fast in corporate circles. My mother's empire was shaking. Marcus stopped answering my calls. I wasn't surprised. Cowards never stayed for the cleanup. What did surprise me was the subpoena that arrived 2 days later. Federal Court, Houston Division, Victoria Cruz et al. Versus United States Department of Energy. They were trying to block the investigation, claiming unlawful coercion and theft of intellectual property. It was the final act of arrogance. I knew what it meant. She thought she could bully the government like she'd bullied everyone else. But this time she was wrong. The courtroom was cold, modern, all glass and chrome. My mother sat across from me, perfectly composed in a navy suit, not a hair out of place. Marcus sat beside her, pretending he was there by duty, not desperation. Their lawyer, Eleanor, looked sharp as ever, though her confidence flickered when she saw the DOJ's team enter 6 lawyers deep with Rivera and Collins leading them. The judge entered, voice firm and clipped. We are here to determine the lawful ownership and custodianship of the Cruz Ranch and to examine allegations of federal interference. My mother's attorney spoke first, smooth and practiced. Your Honor, this is a matter of property rights. Miss Cruz has conspired with federal agents to deprive my clients of lawful assets tied to Helios Development Group, assets funded and developed under Victoria Cruz's oversight. Rivera rose. Respectfully, Your Honor, Helios Development Group was never a legitimate entity. It was a laundering mechanism for illegal research payments tied to a declassified federal project, Project Selenium. We have documentation of falsified grants, offshore transfers, and evidence that the plaintiffs attempted to coerce Miss Natalie Cruz into signing away federally protected land. The judge's brow lifted. Evidence. Collins stepped forward and set down a thick binder. 72 pages, Your Honor. Wire transfers, emails, and internal memos from Helios's own servers. My mother's hand twitched. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Rivera continued, voice calm but cutting. Miss Cruz recorded a direct threat from Marcus Cruz on June 5th confirming coercion. She also provided digital copies of correspondence between Victoria Cruz and Helios contractors referencing reclamation of Site 7, which this court will find was classified under national security law. The courtroom buzzed. The judge called for silence. My mother tried to interrupt, but Rivera didn't stop. We also have evidence that the fire at the Cruz Ranch was not an accident. Forensic analysis of the site uncovered accelerant traces consistent with arson. Surveillance footage from the area shows a Helios security vehicle less than 2 miles from the property that night. Eleanor objected loudly, but it didn't matter, the words were already out. The courtroom air grew heavy, almost electric. The judge turned toward my mother. Mrs. Cruz, would you like to respond? She stood slowly, posture-perfect voice, calm enough to sound rehearsed. Everything I've done has been to protect my family's legacy. My mother Dolores made a mistake. She allowed herself to be manipulated by federal greed. I only sought to finish what she started. I stood. You mean profit from it? Her eyes snapped to me. You think you understand legacy, Natalie? You've never built anything. You just destroy what others create. For the first time in my life, I didn't look away. You built an empire on deceit. Grandma built one on integrity. Guess which one survived? The judge struck the gavel once sharp. Order. After hours of testimony, the verdict came swiftly. The court ruled that Helios's assets would be frozen pending federal review, the Cruz Ranch classified under Joint Department of Energy custody, and Victoria and Marcus Cruz charged with conspiracy to defraud the government, obstruction, and attempted coercion. The moment the gavel fell for the final time, my mother's mask broke. For the briefest second, I saw something raw in her eyes, not regret, not guilt, fear. The kind of fear that comes when power finally meets consequence. Reporters swarmed outside, shouting questions, flashbulbs popping. I said nothing. I walked straight past them into the sunlight. Collins met me on the courthouse steps. You did it, he said quietly. No, I said, looking up at the endless Texas sky. Grandma did. I just finally let her truth breathe. A week later, the news broke. Helios collapsed overnight. Its board members resigned. My mother's mugshot trended for a day before disappearing under newer scandals. Marcus fled to Europe under the guise of business relocation, and for the first time in 40 years, Project Selenium was officially acknowledged not as a weapon but as a lesson in accountability. The Department of Energy released a public statement naming me as civilian liaison to the Ethical Oversight Committee. I didn't care about the title. What mattered was that my grandmother's name was cleared. That evening back at the ranch, I stood where the fire had once raged. The new research facility gleamed on the horizon, masked as a solar array, her design revived in truth. I thought about legacy, about the way power passes through generations like a dangerous inheritance, and how sometimes the only way to protect it is to burn the lies around it down to ash. As the sun sank low over the red desert, I whispered, "It's over now, Grandma. They finally saw what you saw." The wind answered warm and steady, carrying away the last trace of smoke that had haunted this land for decades. The desert was quiet again. A year had passed since the trial, and the Cruz Ranch was no longer the barren wasteland the world mocked. It was the heart of a new kind of energy revolution. The Department of Energy had finished building the facility beneath the southern ridge, sealed within reinforced layers, its operations fully transparent to a joint civilian ethics board. I chaired that board. It still sounded strange in my head, me the family failure now, overseeing the legacy my grandmother fought to protect. But I didn't live in Washington or Santa Fe. I stayed here in the same old house rebuilt from the fire. I kept to the porch the crooked horseshoe, even the burn marks on one wall scars were honest things. Every evening I sat outside with a cup of coffee and watched the sun drop below the horizon, painting the land gold. It was in that light that I felt her most Grandma Dolores. One afternoon, a delivery truck rolled up the drive. The driver handed me a plain envelope brittle with age. It had been sealed under court order during the investigation. The label read, "Property of Dolores Cruz. to be opened by Natalie Cruz upon resolution of Helios case. I carried it inside, hands trembling, and sat at the kitchen table. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a faded photograph. The photo showed her young standing beside a steel door half buried in sand. Behind her were two men in DOE uniforms. She looked defiant, wind whipping her hair, one hand on the padlock. On the back, she'd written, "The hardest truths are the ones we're born to carry." The letter was short. "My dearest Natalie, if you're reading this, it means you did what I could not. I never wanted this burden to pass to you, but I knew no one else in our family would choose integrity over comfort. You saw what they refused to see, that protecting something doesn't always mean hiding it. Sometimes it means bringing it into the light. The land was never worthless. It was waiting for courage. The world will tell you to sell, to surrender, to silence yourself. Don't. The same strength that made them mock you will one day make them listen. And when they do, speak softly but stand firm. Remember, Natalie, the real inheritance isn't the land. It's the spine to guard it. Love always, Grandma." I sat for a long time before realizing I was crying, the quiet kind of tears that come when a circle finally closes. The house felt alive again, filled with her presence. I stepped outside, letter still in hand, and looked toward the ridge where the research teams worked behind their mirrored fences. Somewhere down there, beneath tons of rock and reinforced steel, was the humming core of Helium-3 stable, now monitored, contained. The same energy that had once threatened to destroy everything now powered clean cities across the Southwest. That evening, Rivera called. "The secretary's office wants to know if you'll attend the dedication ceremony next week," she said. I laughed softly. "Tell them this place doesn't need speeches. It needs silence." She chuckled. "Still your grandmother's granddaughter." After we hung up, I stood watching the first stars pierce the purple sky. Coyotes called in the distance, and the wind carried the faint scent of rain. For the first time, I felt peace, not triumph, not revenge, just peace. The kind you only earn after choosing truth over blood. I thought about my mother. She'd been sentenced to 10 years, but was already appealing. Marcus had vanished somewhere in Europe, last spotted on a yacht he didn't own. They were ghosts now of greed, of arrogance, of everything this land had to outlast. The world called what happened here the Selenium Redemption. Journalists romanticized it. Professors taught it as a case study in ethics and governance. None of them really understood. It wasn't about power or discovery. It was about one woman's promise and another's decision to keep it. As night fell, I folded the letter and placed it beside Grandma's ledger on the table. The two belonged together, one the burden, the other the release. Then I turned off the lamp and stepped onto the porch. The horizon still glowed faintly, the last breath of daylight tracing the ridgeline where everything began. Sometimes I thought about the words I'd said to the agents that day, underground, "Help me make sure the right people don't die." And I realized the right people didn't. Grandma had been right all along. Some things are worth more than money. Some legacies are built not from what you gain, but from what you refuse to sell. I whispered into the wind, "We did it." And somewhere out there in the hush between the desert and the stars, I could almost hear her answer. The sun knows, Natalie. The sun always knows.